Thanks, Linda, and thanks for everyone who's joined this webinar on shaping your identity as a tester. It's also called Blogging for Your Career, and it's always fun. So a little bit about me. My name is Chris Kinst, and I've been a software tester for about 10 years now for both companies large and small. I've worked for insurance companies, banks, telecoms, and those are the large companies, and then a couple of small startups. The company that I'm at now is called Dr. Evidence, and I'm the sole software tester for them. We are a small software company focused on improving the way healthcare organizations make decisions. I'm also an instructor for the Association for Software Testing's Black Box Software Testing courses. Hopefully many of you have heard about those. And for fun, I also teach in scuba dive. In the rest of the spare time that I have, I write about software testing. You can see my software testing blog is kinst.com. You can go there and subscribe for email updates. I also started a small software testing conferences list, which is at testingconferences.org. It's actually an open source list, so you can go to GitHub, update conferences in case I missed anything. So in December of 2014, I wrote an article called Blogging for Your Career, where I argued software testers and really any modern software professional should shape their own identity. So there's this concept of identity, and really identity is how you think of yourself. So you have an identity right now. It may be something you may not have thought about it before, but it's something that you have. You may consider yourself a sports fan. You may be a fan of a particular team. You may consider yourself to be a father, a mother, a reader of books. Whatever it is, you have this sort of idea of how you think of yourself. Your identity on the web is sort of a presentation of this identity. So let's give you some examples. So a presentation of your identity, you can do this for individuals or a company. Twitter is a really good example, or I should say Twitter bios are really good examples of what people think of themselves and then how they're presenting that. So for example, I often say that I'm a professional software tester and scuba instructor. Ben Simo, who is a well-known software tester, considers himself an amphibious, time-traveling, context-driven cyborg software tester. Others do this as well. So Fred Wilson is a well-known venture capitalist here in the United States. Reid Hoffman, who's the founder of LinkedIn. And so this online presentation of yourself can be really beneficial. Now, the concept of identity and using your real identity is actually pretty new, like in the last 10 years. So in the previous 10 years, if you had an identity online, it was likely a pseudonym or you were anonymous, and it was something like an online handle that you have. But since Facebook, since LinkedIn, a lot of the concentration now is on your real identity. So it's your real, you as a person who's actually online. And your identity shapes your actions. So as a scuba diver, I often look at things in testing and out of testing as how they relate. So our identities shape our actions. And the important thing about putting your identity online is it's really a great way for testers to brand and differentiate themselves. So I wrote this article called Blogging for Your Career where I said, listen, you need to put your identity online and then you need to brand yourself. And you need to make this presentation because we're in a world, if you're in software testing, I don't know what the exact numbers are, but I imagine there are at least 1 million software testers, give or take, in the world. And how many of those do you think have blogs or have online identities? My guess is it's probably somewhere less than 1,000, at least the well-known ones. And so if you're looking at this as how do you set yourself aside, how are you unique in your industry, your online identity becomes very important. And it's very important for branding and differentiating yourselves among those millions and millions of people. So, okay, online identity is important. It's your way for differentiation and for identification. So what happens if you just ignore this webinar and you decide not to shape it? Well, basically no one knows who you are. You don't exist online. And that means you have whatever reputation you have among other software testers or coworkers, basically there's no way to tell that online. And this is important because if you're like me, when you hire someone or you think about hiring someone, you Google their name. And I'm sure you've Googled your own name or Binged it or whatever you use. But the goal is to have some type of identity, some type of presentation, some information about who you are and what you stand for. So, okay, so no one knows who you are. That's not as bad. Another problem that could happen if you don't shape it yourself is that someone else shapes it because they have a similar name to you. Now, this isn't as big of a deal, probably for most people, but I actually have a couple of friends whose this is a problem for them. So at least in the United States and probably in Europe, a common name is David Smith. And I have a friend who has the most generic name. His name's David John Smith. And so anytime you go to look for information about him online, it just doesn't exist or it points to another person. Michael Bolton, who's a famous software tester, Michael Bolton, there's a singer also with that same exact name. That would be very confusing if someone was looking for the singer and or the software tester and they got crisscrossed. My uncle is a writer. He's published a couple of books. His name is John Cox. There's also another John Cox that publishes under the same name. So it can be very confusing if you don't shape your own online identity as you are this person with these sort of set of skills and interests. You could be easily confused. Okay, so what happens if you do shape it? Because that's really what we're talking about here. Well, the obvious things are a little bit more of increased awareness around who you are, but also of the skills and potential for increased credibility among people in the same industry and even outside the industry. I have a lot of experience with this. I've been blogging for, I want to say 8 years now, give or take. And so I've had some experience with people interacting and reflecting on the online identity that I've sort of developed over the years. It's interesting to note, LinkedIn is already trying to do this. So if you have a LinkedIn profile, you do have an online identity to some degree. This may be the only thing that you have, and it's definitely not the best thing, but LinkedIn this is actually, if you can see this image here, link your coursework to your identity. I take, on occasion, I'm always interested in constant learning about new things, learning about subjects on a deeper level. And I spotted this the last time I was on Coursera, and it says link your coursework to your identity. And basically what that means is please put this badge saying you completed the course on your LinkedIn profile. So here Coursera is actually saying, listen, if you have LinkedIn, you already have an online identity. And this is fine, except the problem with LinkedIn is that it's a list of things that you've already done. And if you're trying to get better at something, if you want to show that you have interest and passion in a new area, LinkedIn's not going to show that. It's only going to show things that have happened. So one of the interesting things about being able to shape it is you can talk about a lot of this stuff. You can talk about the things that, let's say you're really into automated testing, but you want to learn more about manual testing, or maybe you're not very good with programmatic skills and you want to develop those, or you have an interest in security or in privacy. Shaping your identity and specifically blogging and producing content about your interest in what you learn, that puts it out there that you're blogging for your next career. You're blogging for the thing you want to happen later on. And that's really important because that's a part of the continuous shaping of your online identity. And that is what people really want to see. You want to see that you have an interest, that you have a passion, that you take some deep thought, and you show the knowledge that you have. So this demand for skills and knowledge in a particular field is hugely important. This is one of the things that I see, aside from the increased awareness, this is one of the things that I see a lot when I talk to, I get random emails, random LinkedIn information, just from having the blog and talking about testing. I've been approached because of my geographic location, so like someone will look online and try and find resumes, and then they'll take those resumes of people that are in the local area and search online for their name. And then the fact that mine comes up with articles where I'm discussing these problems, it gives people a better idea of what skills and what knowledge that I have. And even though, for example, the company that I work at right now, this is how my chief technology officer found me. He basically found some resumes, and he was looking for, even though we're a distributed company, he was looking for people that were testers that had experience working in his type of company, but also that were in his geographic location. And the fact that I stood out from above all those because I had this blog, I was talking about these problems that they face, it gave him a greater insight into who I was. And so the fact that I was shaping this identity by talking about these things really helped to start the conversation and put me into a better category than others. But just in general, over the past 8 years, I've gotten consulting gigs. I've gotten approached by companies to join their companies even when I haven't been looking. I've gotten, and this is more about blogging and talking about technology, but the opportunity to, Google gave me a free laptop at one point, getting access to software and training and those sorts of things around that. There are lots of benefits for having this public persona, this public identity online. And it definitely increases the demand for your skills. But it's not only a good thing for people who are looking and want to know more about you, it's also a way for you to interact with others. And so there have been a couple examples where this sort of increased awareness and this online identity, this presentation of what the knowledge that you have actually helped the individuals. And specifically with helping them get work. I've seen several people literally blog posts that, listen, I left my job, I'm looking for something new. And Ben Simo is an example of this. He created a blog post called Hire Ben Simo to advertise his work availability. And so people who were already aware or even unaware of who he was could go and search for his online who he was, and he in this blog post listed out the skills and the knowledge that he had, and they could contact him. And this was sort of just a leg up besides applying to individual places. Not only that, other testers saw this and, of course, spread the information. Another more famous, or more well-known, I guess, software tester, Michael Bolton, saw this and decided to write his own public recommendation of Ben. So that's just some of the things that you get when you shape your own identity. And really what it comes down to is there's a lot of talk about what is job security. Because we're knowledge workers and we're skilled people, the best job security really is one where you're sort of always in demand. It's one where the next thing that you want to do is right there and available, and you can move to it because you have the skills and the passion, and you're able to show that in a way that is sort of modern and fit for today. So, okay, how do you create an online identity? Well, as I said, you already have an identity now. You just need to understand what it is. And you can Google or Bing and see what your online version of that is, if you have anything. That's always fun to do. I'm sure many of you have done that. I know I have. If you're not sure what it is, you can talk to others. You can look at the activities and the things that you do now. But it's also a good idea to define what it is, to write it out. Ask yourself these questions: who, what, where, when, why, and how. And this is something that you're going to edit over time. It's something that you're going to develop. It's something that you're going to continually update and make better as things change in your life, as interests change, your identity, the things that you want in the future, aside from what you do now, will change. So once you sort of understand what your identity is, then it's time to put it online. And putting it online, that could be as easy as creating a blog or a website. There are lots of options. I'm just listing a few here. Blogger is a really well-known because it's really easy. WordPress is a little bit harder, but a little bit better for design, that sort of thing. One of the more popular options for creating websites and blogs is GitHub and GitHub Pages. So if you've never joined GitHub before, this is a reason to do it. You can create these nice blogs, and it's all free. But you can also join just regular existing sites like Medium, which is a place that you can go to write. Medium's really well known for publishing content. But as long as you have this website, you have this online real estate, and if you're lucky enough, you already own or can go out and buy your domain name, and then you literally have your own real estate on the web. But you want to have this location where people can go, where people can find that display your online identity. And then after you have that, you can start shaping it. And so shaping it's the important part. This is where things come about. And I think writing is a very good way to do that. There are other ways. You can put work products and portfolio items if you have them. But you want to tell your testing story. And that can be as easy as having an about page where you describe who you are and where you've come from. It's surprising how many people, especially in software testing, just dropped into the field from all these different areas. And knowing what you did before and how you got in there, that's really fascinating stuff. Especially if we have some overlap or some commonalities. If you were in one career before and you found ways that one career really blends into testing, that's a great, unique story to tell. You can, of course, link to LinkedIn, but LinkedIn alone is not enough. I think that writing about your experiences, not just for the job that you have, but for the job you want, it's a great way to shape your identity. And if you're worried about producing content, if you're worried about writing, don't. It's a little hard to get started, but once you do, you sort of get in the hang of it and you get into a progression. And just remember that you're the expert of your own experiences. So as long as you're describing and telling stories from your own experiences, no one's going to come up and say that you're wrong, because you're the only one that knows how those experiences actually went about, how they took place. So publishing content is a big deal. This is what I've been trying to do, trying to get into the habit. I try and write about the things that I experience on the job, as well as the things that I'm learning about. GitHub code examples. So if you do automation, or if you're a toolsmith and you build tools, and you do this sort of thing in a public space or with open source projects, this is really good to link to. The number one work product that testers generally produce are bug reports. You know this, right? So we spend a lot of time writing and cleaning up bug reports. So if you have example bug reports that you can use, that you contributed to an open source project on GitHub or somewhere else, these are the things that you can link to and show sort of your examples. If you've taken a class or done some work in public, this is a great thing to put on there. Even if you just had a web page that was link to all the other places that you wrote. Let's say you don't write on your own, or you contribute as part of some other projects. Just having a link, having a web page with your story and then links out to all the places, that's also very useful. One way to look about writing and really knowledge development is to sort of, I constantly see two different paths that people take when they develop their careers. And that's what we're talking about. So shaping your online identity is about creating this awareness and demand and this unique perspective on you. You as the tester, you as the modern software professional. And there are a couple of different ideas about this. Some people have the idea, listen, I want to start as an introductory tester and then work my way up to senior and then to a manager and to maybe running a testing division. And they sort of see working up the ladder as the only way to improve. And it's not. In fact, most of us actually improve through the depth of knowledge and skill. And writing and written communication is one of the best ways to show that depth of knowledge. In fact, if you're here in this webinar, that means you're at least semi-interested in personal development and becoming better. If you've gone to uTest and to the universities and the links and you follow the blog, you know that there are a number of software testers and software professionals out there, and a number of them write. And so really written communication is through blogs and through articles. That's the major way this testing community really disseminates information. Sure, there are books and there are papers, but by far the most read things are the blog posts and the written communications. That's not to say you couldn't build some visual examples, some videos, some interactive things, but by far the way that most people have shaped their identity and the way most people interact is through written communication. And so showing off that depth of knowledge is by writing or by telling your testing story. That's one of the best ways that you can shape your identity. So I know this webinar, the point of it, once you understand that identities are real, you have one now, and they shape our actions. They're shaping your actions right now. And as a software tester, you need to put out that online identity to brand and differentiate yourself. Like I said, you're one of 1 million testers, give or take, in the world, and very few of us are actually online in communities talking about this sort of thing, shaping and becoming our own reasons for succeeding. But it's time for you to take up that position and actually differentiate yourself, build a blog, and start blogging for your career. It's hard work. I'm not gonna kid you on that. It does take time that you have to set out, and often it's time outside of work that you'll do this. But the benefits in the long run are just too great to ignore. And it's really easy to create a blog. It's really easy to publish some basic content. It takes time to add to that content over time, but let's be honest, it's fun. It's really fun to do. And that's what I have to say. So do we have, I guess, Linda?
Yes. So I'm going to give you guys a minute for your fingers to catch up with Chris's presentation. A couple of questions have already come in, but I'm going to give you guys a minute to kind of process. I know Chris had a lot of information in a short amount of time, or a relatively short amount of time. I'm going to give you guys a minute to kind of process that, think of what your questions are. Chris, I'll give you about 30 seconds to rest your voice and grab a drink of water, and then we'll start with the Q&A. So find that questions box in your UI. That's where you would type your questions, and let her rip.
If you'd like me to repeat something because I went too fast over it, I apologize if I spoke too quickly, but if I need to repeat or rehash something, I can certainly do that.
All right, so we have a good question about blogging at the very beginning of your career as a tester. So I'm going to add on to that question, Cassandra, if you don't mind if I do, especially the beginning of your career when you really don't have any testing experience. We often see this a lot. We have a lot of uTesters who come to us and want to begin their career. So Chris, how do you leap across the content bridge over to, as you said, blogging about the career you want? Because you're really at the very beginning of something that you don't have much experience in yet.
Yeah, so you may not have a lot of experience, but you definitely have your identity. So you know who you are, and whether you're out of college or you're switching from another career, that gives you a basis for at least getting up a website and like an about page. And then you're not going to be able to write about the experiences that you have testing necessarily, although as you get started and you don't have to publish every week. You don't have to do a lot of churning out sort of things. You can take time to craft the things that you want to talk about, but merely describing your interest in things and wandering and sort of musings that you have. So for example, taking a webinar or joining a VBST class, those are things that you can write about. You can write about going to conferences. You can write about all the things that you're learning without having experience. You can write about the things that you look forward to, or maybe the things that you're hoping to have happen, like goals that you set out. So they don't necessarily have to be really deep into testing theory and knowledge. They can start out as all these sort of different areas that you're hoping will overlap or you're hoping to have experience with. And so if you write about, listen, my goals for 2015, join uTest, join a bunch of projects, learn about how to test mobile devices, and you put that out, you know you're going to have a follow-up to that, because once you put that out, 6 months or a year from now, you'll go, listen, this is what happened, this is where things completely differed, I like this. So there's lots of ideas that you can put into a blog without having to have a lot of experience.
Excellent. That's a great point. Now, there's a question about repeating the benefits of running a blog, and I'm going to relate that to what you just said because, as you said, that sounds like a lot of work, Chris. Most of us already have a full-time job, so
Yeah.
why should anyone start a blog? Because that really sounds like a big time investment. What are the benefits of it?
So the benefits of it, so you don't need to start with a blog. You can just start with a simple web page. Justin Rohrman, R-O-H-R-M-A-N, Justin Rohrman, literally has a blog, a web page with a picture on it, a biography, and then links to the things that he's done. And he's got this identity. He's got his bio, his story about what he is and what he's about, and then he's got all these links to the things that he's done. And he actually writes, but he writes for a lot of other websites. But yeah, it is work, but it's fun. And it's a great way to reflect on what you've done, and it's a great way to understand the things that you're doing. The benefits really are, once you go from consuming information to producing information, you're going to find that there's intrinsic value. So the fact that you can write something down and coherently explain something has tremendous benefit. It can even be as simple as, do you understand what software testing means? Like, you could start with, what is software testing and what does that mean, and try and explain it. You could even write it.
That's a good topic. I might steal that for the uTest blog.
It's actually really crazy. So James Bach was interviewed on the uTest blog not too long ago, right? And one of the things that he said, I think this was at Star West, was he thought testers should draw a diagram of what testing was, what they thought testing was, and then go back and do testing, and then go back and see if the diagram would change. And those are things you can write about. But the idea that you would think about this stuff and then write it up, even though it may be some work, is hugely beneficial to showing that you actually know what you're talking about and that you care enough to even show it. And those things that you know what you're talking about and that you care enough to show it puts you ahead of anyone else that really doesn't.
So now, Chris, Ekaterina has a question of whether she should tell her background story if she's changing her profession. For example, maybe highlighting what she did, what was successful, even though it's not software testing as a profession. Is there value in that in telling your background story?
Yeah, and what you would probably want to do is wait until you get into the new profession and then reflect on how that previous profession or previous professions really relates. So there have been people, one of the benefits of teaching the PBST courses is that we make people, describe themselves and write their bios, basically. And it's amazing how many people come from like chemical or engineering fields. Some come from art and linguistics. And once you get into a particular field, it's fun to reflect on your background and how those things sort of relate to your new career. So that there'll always be overlaps, regardless of what career you're in or were in. And you can link those and make this great story about how diverse your background is, and that shows why you're unique.
Interesting. Okay, so I'm going to group a couple of different of these questions because there's a question about YouTube and video blogging, because I know you've concentrated a lot about the written word, but I'm also going to dovetail that with, why bother writing or creating your own web page when not only do you have YouTube, you have LinkedIn, you have, as you said, GitHub, just almost on any platform. You can publish, you can self-publish. So
yeah.
What about the different options?
Yeah, so that's a good question. It doesn't matter so much about the platform that you choose as long as you do it. And having said that, the problem I have with LinkedIn, like I said, is you're not describing so much where you're going or what you want. LinkedIn is basically this record of sort of the things that you've done. It's basically an online resume, right? And if you think your online resume is like the best thing you can do, then that's fine, but you're really not, an online resume is really not disseminating any information. Like you're not showing any knowledge. You may show cool places that you've worked, but that's about it. So LinkedIn, in my opinion, is really limited. The platform you use, whether it's a blog, whether it's GitHub, whatever, it really depends on what you want to do and what you want to show. I like the idea of having one central location, even if it points out to all the others. So one central source where people can find information about you, where your identity really sort of centralizes. I think that makes it much easier for those who are looking around to find it. As far as creating different types of content, go for it. One of the things I want to start doing is video interviews, those types of things where it's a little more interactive. They just require a lot more work. Editing a video, editing a webinar, doing the additional things, creating visualizations. If those things are your passion, do it, because you'll probably be very good at it. Everything is going to require some work. So if writing is not your strong suit, but you like visualizations, you like YouTube, you're comfortable in front of a camera, that would probably be another interesting thing for if you wanted to make a YouTube video or video blog.
I
that
like
kind of
your
stuff
encouragement.
really depends on you.
I like your encouragement. That's a good attitude. So yes, to reiterate, it is the channel that best fits your personality and what works for you.
Absolutely. If you want to become the next YouTube star, go for it.
Wow. Ooh, what the next software testing YouTube star. I don't think there is a software testing YouTube star, you guys, so I think there's your opportunity. You guys are bringing in some great questions. Just to give a time check, we have about 20 minutes left. We're going to try and I'm going to work Chris to the bone, and we're going to get to every question if we possibly can. Clara has a question, and I'm actually going to take this one because it's specific about uTest. So Chris, I'll give you a minute to rest your voice for a second. She wants to know how you write about your experiences testing in uTest, for example, putting examples of your bugs, since we do have a code of conduct and a non-disclosure agreement. Clara, thank you for knowing that we have both of those things, first of all. Second of all, you can still write about your testing experience without specifically mentioning customers, test cycles, payouts, all the things that we ask you to keep confidential. Chris had a couple of good examples during his webinar in terms of, think of if you're new to testing, here's what I've learned in my first 3 months of testing. And you can talk about just your personal experience. You don't necessarily have to link that to a customer or specific actions that you did within a uTest test cycle. So I hope that answers it. If you want additional clarification on what may be inside or outside uTest, COC, and NDAs, I will gladly work with you on that.
So one of the other interesting things about that, to sort of piggyback, is this idea of your work products or portfolio. And it's really difficult, I've found, for software testers. Most of what we do is not very visual. But in general, in order to produce a work products that you can put out in the public, to build a portfolio in that sense with example bug reports, you really have to do testing on open source, or most of the time, like most people work a full-time job, and most things that are produced within that full-time job cannot be used publicly, right? I mean, so this is a good example. You are on a uTest project, or you're on a company project, and you've probably written hundreds of bug reports. Or if you're just starting out, a few, maybe a dozen. But those are things you can't really use out in the public. Again, because of NDAs, because of sensitive information. This is where you have to, again, sort of take the extra time. If you're in a training class that tests a project, this is when you'd want to use those examples from outside of work, if that makes sense.
That does. So now we have a question about English language. So we have someone who's not an English native. Can this impact content, or does that not matter?
That's a good question. Very good question. If you're, I'm going to say that it probably does not matter. If you're concerned about becoming well known on an international scale, that will probably matter. Yes. As far as starting out and getting some footing and starting to establish your identity, local is the way to go. So I would say no, that's not going to be a problem for you, at least starting out. If you put your identity out there and in your local language, then you're just increasing the chances, and the odds are better that you're local for your geographic or your region or your language. You're going to be ahead of those who don't have any online identity. So anything is better than nothing at this point.
So this dovetails very nicely with Paul's question about how you build an audience. He wants to know, why should anyone care about what you have to say?
Well, you can first, so this is going into blogging. It doesn't matter if anyone cares what you have to say. So the reason that you blog, first of all, for writing or doing any of this stuff, the reason that you should do anything that's concerned with your identity is because you want to build your brand, and you want to differentiate yourself. So the first audience that you really need to focus on is you. And so writing or producing any of this stuff is going to have intrinsic benefit. So it's going to have benefit for you first and foremost. So you don't have to worry about writing for other people. You don't have to worry about what other people are going to think until people eventually do find your blog or you do build up a readership. And you don't need to worry about that at first. The easiest way to build up readership, honestly, is coworkers, friends, and family. Like my aunt reads my stuff, and she knows nothing about software, and she knows nothing about software testing. But I'm able to write according to her in a way where she can understand like 80 to 90% of the stuff. And so that's fun for them. So the first people that you sort of show this to, coworkers, friends, and family. And then you can worry about building an audience later.
So now what about your cadence in posting? David has a question. Is there a general guideline regarding the number of posts that should, quote unquote, should be posted per a certain time frame? So how do you decide what that cadence should be?
And that's when you get really into, you've sort of committed to, I'm going to write a lot. I've read a lot of books about writing and building your identity and really sort of blogging for your future. There are a lot of books out there, and most of them say blog a couple of times a month. I would say put a goal for once or twice a month and then see how much you hit that. You don't want to get into a situation where you're upset with yourself for not having written anything. So you can set a very lofty goal of one post per month and then see how well you hit that. And if you have more things to talk about, then you can up that goal. At least for the beginning, like I said, you're writing for yourself. So anything that you get down is going to be good.
So, and this again, fits nicely with the next question of how do you make the time? So, for example, works full-time already, spend time at home with the kids. You're a perfect example of this. If I remember correctly, you have a family, you have a full-time job, you teach other
Well,
folks.
actually, yeah, I don't have kids, but I do a lot of things outside. And the honest truth is you just have to make time. So if you're used to time boxing, so if you do session-based test management, if you do any type of time boxing, what I would recommend is 30 minutes a day. Just set a time box and just commit yourself to quiet. And this goes for anything. This goes for writing a bio. This goes for setting up the website, creating a GitHub account, whatever it is. Just set 30 minutes and try and do 30 minutes a day or 30 minutes every other day. And just try. You just have to realize that everything that you want to do is going to take up some time and just make it a priority.
Okay, and I'm sorry for assigning children where you have no children. So next question is...
Yeah, that's fine.
See, I just gave you an instant family. Like, Chris, you have a family, right? So next question is something a little more on the cautious side. What could possibly damage my identity while blogging, and what should not be mentioned?
What should not be mentioned is anything you're not willing to back up. So one of the things that sort of goes along with this creating an identity is credibility. And so you're building this and you're talking about the things that you're doing. What you don't want to talk about are things that you really know nothing about, and you want to avoid making claims as such. So you probably wouldn't say, go out. You probably wouldn't want to publish anything that you weren't willing or to back up or things that you really didn't understand very well. So what example would I give? So you probably wouldn't want to come out and say that I'm the best software tester in the world and I'm awesome, and I will put, anyone's hands down in a competition, I'll beat them, because most people wouldn't take you seriously. That may be flattery for you, and that may be your thinking, but when you write something, you want to remember that it's out in the public and it can be publicly criticized. And so any writing that you do can be publicly criticized. And part of that is a good thing because we get feedback on what we write. So if we write something, and it's okay to write something and then to be wrong. It's okay to write something and for someone to comment and change your perception, like, oh, that's a good point that you made, and to do that out in public. But really anything that you're not comfortable defending should probably not go out in public.
So Chris, what about sharing, like sharing something, you know, again, since most of us work full-time or have clients, even if you're not with one company, would you run your blog post by someone in your company that you're, you know, hey, I'm planning to start a blog and this is what I'll be writing about? Or how do you approach that with your current employer?
You could do that. I mean, if you're writing this outside of work, there's really nothing they could do. That's not to say that they wouldn't, if you told them, they probably wouldn't care very much because these are your own private thoughts on things. It's up to you how much you want to talk about your current employer. You might want to generalize or anonymize things a bit. So if you want to talk about things that you feel aren't right with your company, it's probably okay to put that out there. I've done that before where I'm like, the company I'm working for is just, you know, the way they manage test management is just stupid. I wouldn't come out and say that I think my company is stupid, but I would try and analyze where the faults were. So I'm trying to understand where the problem is so I can address it. And whenever I've sent this around to coworkers, to the people in my company, they've always been very supportive of that. Having said that, you could certainly mention to the fact that you've written something. You can certainly try and get it approved by legal. Usually as long as you're doing things outside of work, not during work hours, and you're not disparaging your company in any way, it's probably a good thing. Like it's a positive thing that they would most likely support.
So
That's
now,
been my experience.
what about future employers? So for example, I'm going to group a couple of questions here because there's an interest in terms of, you know, the whole hiring aspect and how people may find you, whether you're on YouTube, whether you run your own blog, whether you're on LinkedIn, or, you know, even publishing on LinkedIn. How do you manage that in terms of your presentation of yourself to potential future employers?
Well, you have to manage it actively. So it's like having a Facebook profile or an Instagram or any of those things that you put out there. You have to imagine that when you put something out there, people are going to view it. So it's up to you to constantly review what's out there and whether or not you agree with what's out there. So it's the same sort of premise. Googling yourself, reviewing the things that you've written or published, that's a good thing to know about. So you probably shouldn't go about it blindly, just assuming everything's okay. Even today, I will go and Google myself and find that something I said back when, years ago, doesn't make sense now, or I disagree with, so I will remove it. Sometimes Facebook posts, you know, become public, that sort of thing. Those are things that just in reality you have to manage nowadays. In terms of viewing your sort of identity online, you just have to take an active role in managing it. It depends on how you publish. It really does. But you've got to imagine that most people, when they make hiring decisions or they're interested in you, are going to do a Google search. So whatever turns up in your Google search results about you says something. And if you don't want it to say what it already says, then you have to work to remove it or replace it with something better.
So now what about someone, who is a beginner or who is changing careers? And again, I'm combining two questions here. In terms of how you present yourself when you don't really have that much experience. So let's say you have less than a year of experience, or in BR's case, changing careers, learn testing on my own with the help of a mentor. So how do you present, for example, that lack of either experience or education, but yet somehow you're trying to speak as an authority or as a person who knows testing? How does that work?
So this is going to take some time, and you're going to have to probably constantly edit, but really it's about sort of spinning things in a favorable way. So if you came from a field into testing, you could certainly say that. You could certainly say, listen, I have a background in mathematics or linguistics or whatever it is, and I didn't find that fulfilling, and I found that I have a new passion for software testing, and you can basically describe the things you're looking forward to. Like, I have a mentor, like I'm really passionate about this, I find these things interesting. You can talk about the future that you expect to see, and you can talk about the things that interest you without relying on this is what I've already done. So it's really about sort of telling your story in a positive light. So you don't focus on the negative things. You don't focus on the I don't have a lot of hands-on experience. You focus on I'm really excited, I'm really passionate, I can't wait to learn, I'm diving headfirst in. And you start to talk about all the positive aspects of what you see as potential.
So now, here's a great question about what you've learned from blogging. Have people given or directed your content that has helped build your portfolio? So do you have any examples to share where feedback has actually influenced either a blog post or just the direction of what you're covering?
Yeah, definitely. Let me see if I can find an example now that I said that. Yeah, so I had, the one that comes to mind is when I first started taking the BBST classes, I was telling friends who don't do any of this stuff, they basically just are 9-to-5ers or whatever, they just have their jobs and they're fine with that, and I was explaining, and one of the things that I like about being able to write is sort of this idea that I'd be able to explain something with some detail in a coherent way that someone would understand it. And so I explained why I was taking these courses, but I didn't explain it very well. And the person looked at me confused like, okay. So that became a topic of something that I wrote about. So it was like, okay, I clearly wasn't able to explain this. So I went through and wrote an article about how I would explain it again. But I've also gotten input from people where I've put a blog post out and it's completely changed. I think I wrote something about how testers shouldn't ever give estimates. And a software developer coworker of mine was like, well, that's very dumb. And we basically went through this whole public debate about it. And I came away going, wow, I just got a lot more input from additional stakeholders. And now I really need to revise, like it was good enough information that I really needed to revise my thinking. And then I've been able to, I don't think I wrote an updated blog post, but it's been on my mind. And now whenever I discuss it, I factor those things in. So it's a great way to put out there and get feedback, and now I try and get, even before I publish, I send out my articles to friends and coworkers and get their input even before I put it out there. But this whole idea that you can get additional input that can change your thinking.
Excellent, Chris. So we are at the very end of our webinar. I see a few more questions that came in. We'll have to reply to those separately outside of this webinar, but like I said, we usually try and get to every question. Sometimes we run out of time, like right now. There is a comment I want to share from Matt who says that being able to blog and combine with the use of Twitter equals powerful branding opportunities, and I have to agree, because we do that at uTest. And Chris, that's a good segue. What the screen that you guys have been looking at are ways to get in touch with Chris or follow Chris. I encourage you to do that. Chris lives what he preaches in terms of blogging and giving back to the software testing community. And also, you're pretty prolific on Twitter. So if you guys are on Twitter, please follow him. If you're not on Twitter, get on Twitter and follow him, and also follow uTest. I want to give you guys a word of encouragement as well that the uTest blog, we often have guest posts. If you go to blog.utest.com, There is a submission form where if you have a blog idea that you want to write about, we certainly want to hear about it. If you have a blog post ready to go, we would love to read it and see if we can put that up on the uTest blog. Chris, I don't know if you have any final last words, but we are right at the hour mark for our webinar. I want to
say, yeah, I forgot.
Yes.
Yeah, I forgot to include my email, but if you're on Twitter and you have questions about anything that we've discussed, I provide free warranties. So if you have questions about the things that I talked about, or you want to challenge an idea, Twitter's great for that. If you go to my blog, you can subscribe, but you can also get my contact information there. So again, if you want to follow up one-on-one, I'm more than happy to do that.
Oh, Chris, thank you so much.
Great to hear from you.
You guys, I want to thank you for your time. This webinar was brought to you by uTest University. A copy of this will be posted as soon as I clean up some of our ums and ums. It'll be posted in uTest University shortly at university.utest.com. Chris, I want to thank you for your time and your knowledge, and uTesters, you guys rock. I'm telling you, you guys had some great questions. Look for this in University, and I'll see you guys soon.